Forget everything you think you know about what is happening between Israel and Iran right now. Forget the headlines, forget the press briefings and the carefully worded statements coming out of Tel Aviv and Washington. What is unfolding at this very moment is not a diplomatic standoff. It is not a war of words. It is not saber rattling for domestic political consumption on either side. What is happening is the opening sequence of a military campaign that has already been authorized, already been war-gamed to the final detail, and is already in motion beneath the surface of every news cycle you are consuming. A senior Israeli Air Force officer speaking to a closed-door session of the Knesset Defense Committee stated explicitly that the operational window they have been waiting for closes in 72 hours. 72 hours, not 72 days, not 72 weeks, 72 hours from the moment that statement was delivered. And the reason it closes in 72 hours has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with weather patterns over the Zagros mountain range, lunar illumination cycles over central Iran, and the rotational status of specific Iranian air defense radar units that Israeli signals intelligence has been tracking for the past 3 months. Having spent decades in military intelligence and having served as a weapons inspector in some of the most operationally complex environments on Earth, I can tell you with absolute clarity that when Israel's senior military planners speak in terms of operational windows measured in hours, the targeting packages are not being drafted, they are finalized. The pilots are not being briefed, they have been briefed repeatedly. The munitions are not being loaded, they are already hanging on pylons. I have been in rooms where decisions like this were made, and I know the difference between a threat and a countdown. What we are watching right now is a countdown. Stay with me because what I am about to walk you through will fundamentally change how you understand the images and statements you are processing right now. Let us begin with what is publicly documented, because even the surface facts that anyone can verify are alarming enough to justify your full attention. Over the past 3 weeks, the Israeli Defense Forces conducted no fewer than 4 large-scale military exercises in the Negev Desert. These exercises involved F-35 Iadir multi-role strike aircraft, KC-46 Pegasus aerial refueling tankers, and Arrow-3 ballistic missile defense batteries operating in fully integrated suppression and intercept sequences. These are not routine training exercises. You do not rehearse long-range deep strike packages against hardened underground infrastructure with that level of multi-domain asset integration, unless those rehearsals are the final run-throughs before an actual mission. Civilian aviation tracking systems, specifically the ADS-B transponder data aggregated by platforms that are publicly accessible, documented flight pattern profiles during those exercises that show round-trip distance calculations consistent with routing into western Iran. The exercises were conducted between 2 and 5 in the morning local time, which mirrors exactly the operational windows that Israeli Air Force planners have preferred for every major strike operation in the past 20 years. From the strike on the Syrian Al-Kibar reactor in 2007 to the series of operations against Iranian weapons convoys in Syria conducted between 2013 and 2023. Simultaneously, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps air defense network has been operating at elevated readiness states for 11 consecutive days, as of the time I am recording this analysis. Their radar systems along the Zagros mountain range corridor, which is the geographic barrier that any aircraft transiting from Israeli airspace toward Iran's central plateau must navigate around or through, have been running continuous emission cycles. Running radar in continuous emission mode is operationally expensive. It burns out the magnetron tubes that generate the microwave energy. It telegraphs your exact position to any signals intelligence platform within range. You do not accept those costs unless your assessment is that an attack is imminent and you need detection capability more than you need electronic concealment. The Iranians know something is coming. Every analyst in every capital, from Washington to Moscow to Beijing, is now asking not whether Israel will strike, but what Israel has actually decided to destroy. Before we go any further, I need you to understand the specific technical realities involved here, because this is where the mainstream analysis completely and consistently falls apart. The Israeli Air Force's primary deep strike asset for a campaign against hardened Iranian infrastructure is the F-35 Iadir. This is not simply the standard American F-35A with a different paint scheme applied to it. The Adir designation, meaning mighty in Hebrew, reflects a comprehensive and classified modification package that engineers at Elbit Systems and Rafael Advanced Defense Systems have integrated into the baseline airframe under a program that has been running since Israel signed its original F-35 purchase agreement in 2010. The modifications include a domestic electronic warfare suite operating on frequency profiles specifically calibrated to engage Iranian radar systems derived from Russian S-300 and S-300 PMU-2 technology, which Iran received under a contract signed in 2007 and finally fulfilled in 2016 after years of international pressure caused delays. The Adir's internal weapons bay is cleared to carry the Spice 1000 electro-optical precision guided weapon and the ROKS air-launched ballistic missile, which has a publicly reported range of approximately 250 kilometers from high-altitude release, meaning the aircraft can engage targets well inside Iranian territory without ever entering the engagement envelope of Iranian medium-range air defense systems. Israel currently operates 36 F-35I aircraft in full operational status, with additional airframes in various stages of depot-level maintenance and mission capability restoration. A first-wave coordinated strike package targeting Iranian air defense nodes and ballistic missile infrastructure would likely employ between 24 and 30 of these aircraft, supported by F-16I Sufa electronic warfare platforms conducting radar jamming support, F-15I RAM aircraft carrying the larger penetrating munitions the F-35's internal bay cannot accommodate, aerial refueling support from the KC-46 tankers Israel received beginning in 2021, and combat search and rescue assets pre-positioned along the egress corridors in the event of aircraft losses. The challenge that Israeli planners have been unable to fully solve, and this is the part that no official briefing will address publicly, is not the ingress leg of the mission. Israeli aircraft can penetrate the outer layers of Iranian air defense with high probability of success. The challenge is what happens to those aircraft during the egress phase, the return flight, when Iranian systems that survived the initial suppression strikes are now networked, active, hunting, and operating with full awareness of the attack routes the Israeli force used on the way in. The Iranians have spent 15 years studying American suppression of enemy air defense packages from published analyses of operations in Iraq, Libya, and Syria. They have dispersed their radar nodes. They have hardened the fiber optic communication links between those nodes to eliminate dependence on radio frequency communication that can be jammed. They have pre-positioned mobile SA-15 Gauntlet systems, which is the NATO designation for the Russian-designed Tor-M1 short-range air defense system, along the egress corridors that Israeli aircraft are most likely to use based on fuel consumption calculations and geographic constraints. These are not speculative precautions. They are documented defensive preparations that appear in IRGC military doctrine publications that are publicly available to anyone who can read Farsi and understands what they are looking at. Iran's underground nuclear infrastructure presents a separate and genuinely profound technical challenge. The Fordo fuel enrichment plant sits under approximately 80 meters of solid granite mountain near the city of Qom. The American GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator is the only Western munition with even a theoretical capability against a facility buried at that depth, and it weighs 30,000 pounds and requires the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber to carry it. Israel does not operate the B-2. The GBU-28 deep throat penetrating weapon that Israel does possess achieves roughly 6 meters of penetration through reinforced concrete per pass, which means that even in a repeated strike scenario with multiple weapons on the same aim point, you cannot reach the operating floor of Fordow with available Israeli munitions. That is not analysis. That is physics, which means Israeli strike planners have made a decision that the mainstream commentary has not caught up with. The objective is not the destruction of Iran's nuclear program. The objective is the destruction of Iran's ability to respond to an Israeli strike. Let me tell you what the mainstream media will not tell you. The strike that is being planned is not primarily a nuclear counterproliferation operation. It is a retaliatory deterrence destruction campaign targeting Iran's ballistic missile force structure, its command and control nodes, its logistics infrastructure, and the integrated air defense network that protects those assets. Because Israeli planners understand something with cold, strategic clarity. A nuclear weapons program that Iran has to rebuild over a period of 5 to 10 years is a serious long-term problem. A coordinated ballistic missile salvo that arrives in the next 14 days is an existential crisis that cannot wait for a long-term solution. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal is the centerpiece of its deterrence posture and the instrument of first resort in any confrontation with Israel. The Shahab 3 medium-range ballistic missile has an operational range of approximately 1,300 kilometers in its baseline configuration, sufficient to strike anywhere in Israel from launch sites positioned throughout western Iran. Its circular error probable in the original unguided variant is roughly 190 meters, which is militarily useful against large area targets, but insufficient for precision engagement of hardened point targets. The EMAD precision-guided evolution of the Shahab family reduces that circular error probable to approximately 50 meters through an electro-optically guided terminal phase maneuver package that activates below 10 kilometers altitude, dramatically improving its effectiveness against specific military installations, airfields, and headquarters facilities. Iran reportedly maintains operational inventory of between 300 and 500 ballistic missile transporter erector launchers distributed across hardened garrisons, cave complexes in the Zagros and Alborz mountain ranges, and mobile platforms that can relocate within 8 to 12 minutes of receiving an alert order, making them extremely difficult to target in a time-sensitive strike campaign. The weapon system that genuinely concerns Israeli planners, the one that almost nobody in the Western press discusses with analytical rigor, is the Fata-2 hypersonic glide vehicle. Publicly unveiled by the IRGC Aerospace Force in June 2023 during a ceremony that included the Supreme Leader, the Fata-2 represents Iran's attempt to field a maneuvering re-entry vehicle concept specifically designed to defeat terminal phase intercept systems. Whether its full hypersonic glide characteristics are operationally mature, or whether the system is still in developmental refinement, is a question that professional analysts debate with genuine uncertainty. What is not debatable is the underlying engineering logic. A warhead that maneuvers unpredictably during its terminal descent at velocities exceeding Mach 5 presents an engagement geometry problem that current Israeli Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 interceptors were not designed to solve. The interceptors were designed around the predictable ballistic trajectory of a conventional re-entry vehicle. The Fata-2 breaks that assumption, and once you break that assumption, the entire mathematical basis of the intercept calculation becomes unreliable. Keep watching, because the next part is where this moves from a regional military confrontation into something that reshapes the international order in ways that we will be living with for the rest of our lives. If Israel executes the strike in this 72-hour window, the first Iranian response will not be a ballistic missile salvo against Tel Aviv. I need you to understand that clearly, because everyone analyzing this as a simple bilateral exchange is missing the doctrine. The first Iranian response will be a proxy activation sequence executed through the axis of resistance command architecture. Within hours of Israeli aircraft entering Iranian airspace, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon will initiate a coordinated rocket and missile campaign along the northern front. The scale of Hezbollah's current inventory, variously estimated at between 130,000 and 150,000 rockets and missiles of varying range and precision, means this is not a harassment campaign. It is a suppression and saturation effort designed to force Israeli air defense systems to engage simultaneously across multiple threat vectors. Hamas reconstruction efforts in Gaza, however degraded by the 2023 to 2024 campaign, will contribute whatever fire support capability has been reconstituted. Houthi forces in Yemen will launch cruise missile and ballistic missile attacks against Israeli territory from a southern trajectory that requires intercepts from a completely different azimuth. Simultaneously, Houthi anti-ship missile forces will threaten commercial tanker traffic in the Red Sea and attack American naval vessels, supporting Israel's defense, forcing the United States to allocate destroyer magazine capacity to its own force protection rather than Israeli theater air defense. This multi-axis saturation architecture is not improvised. It has been rehearsed in tabletop and field exercises across the axis of resistance network going back to at least 2019. The objective is the mathematical exhaustion of Israeli interceptor inventory before the main IRGC ballistic missile strike package is released. Iron Dome interceptors cost between $40,000 and $50,000 per round. David's Sling interceptors cost approximately $1 million each. Arrow 3 interceptors cost approximately $2 million per round. A coordinated multi-axis saturation campaign that forces Israel to expend interceptor inventory defending against proxy fires is the predicate condition that makes the follow-on Iranian ballistic missile strike survivable against Israeli active defenses. Anyone who tells you that Iran's response will be a straightforward missile exchange is either ignorant of Iranian doctrine or lying to you about it. The regional cascade from an Israeli strike in this window extends far beyond the immediate military exchange. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which have been quietly building security relationships with Israel under the Abraham Accords framework, face an immediate and severe internal political crisis. Their populations, regardless of what their governments believe privately about Iran, will not accept images of Iranian cities and military installations burning without demanding that their governments respond. The Abraham Accords framework, the diplomatic architecture that costs years of American diplomatic capital to construct, fractures under that pressure in ways that cannot be easily repaired. Jordan, which shares the longest land border with Israel of any Arab state and has maintained a treaty relationship with Israel since 1994, faces a domestic political explosion the moment Iranian strikes on Israeli territory produce casualty images circulating through Arab social media networks. Then there is the dimension that the financial press will begin covering approximately 48 hours after the first strike, once the initial shock coverage gives way to economic analysis. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products per day, representing roughly 20% of all oil traded globally. Iran does not need to physically blockade the strait to achieve energy market disruption. The IRGC Navy's established doctrine of anti-shipping harassment, acoustic mine deployment in the channel's navigable lanes, and anti-ship missile attacks against commercial tanker traffic is specifically designed to raise war risk insurance premiums to the point where commercial shipping operators voluntarily withdraw their vessels from Gulf transits. When commercial traffic volume drops by even 20 to 30%, the price signal that propagates through global energy markets is disproportionate to the actual volume reduction. The last sustained anti-shipping campaign Iran conducted in the late 1980s during the tanker war occurred when global energy markets had substantially more spare capacity and alternative routing options than exist today. The disruption potential in the current supply environment is categorically larger. I have watched this pattern of escalation and proxy mobilization play out in multiple theaters over the course of my career, and the signature elements I am describing to you are unmistakable The operational window language from the Knesset briefings, the exercise intensity and the specific asset combinations being rehearsed, the Iranian radar activation cycles, the proxy network pre-positioning reports emerging from southern Lebanon, from Houthi-controlled ports, from the IRGC Quds Force logistics network in Syria. All of these indicators are pointing in the same direction simultaneously, and when every independent indicator in a complex intelligence picture points the same way, the conclusion is not ambiguous. What I have not yet told you is the element that makes this particular moment categorically more dangerous than every previous Israeli-Iranian escalation cycle we have documented since 2006. In every previous crisis cycle, there was a functional back channel. There was a mechanism, sometimes American, sometimes mediated through Omani diplomats who maintain relationships with both parties, sometimes involving Qatari intermediaries, through which both sides could communicate thresholds and off-ramp conditions without publicly acknowledging the conversation. Those channels allowed decision-makers on both sides to step back from the edge without losing the domestic political credibility they need to maintain power. According to analytical assessments that I find credible based on the sourcing I have access to, those back channels are not functioning effectively right now. The diplomatic architecture that prevented 3 separate occasions of potential military exchange from becoming actual wars over the past 4 years has been degraded to the point of functional unreliability at this moment of maximum crisis. The next 72 hours will determine whether the Middle East enters a regional war with global economic consequences, or whether some combination of American pressure, third-party mediation, or internal Israeli political constraints produces an intervention that pulls both parties back from strikes that, once launched, cannot be recalled and cannot be explained away. Decisions are being made right now in command centers and cabinet rooms that the public will not receive accurate reporting on for weeks or months. The pilots who may execute this mission are sleeping right now, or they are not sleeping. The Iranian radar operators who have been running at elevated readiness for 11 consecutive days are exhausted and hypervigilant, operating in exactly the dangerous cognitive state where fatigue and stress produce the miscalculations that transform crises into catastrophes. By the time you watch this, the situation may have evolved in directions that I could not have foreseen with the information available at the time of this recording. That is the permanent condition of analysis in a fast-moving crisis, and I acknowledge it without apology. But the structural conditions I have walked you through, the capability architecture, the doctrinal framework, the proxy network design, the diplomatic channel failure, the economic vulnerability of global energy markets. These do not resolve in 72 hours. These are the foundational conditions that will shape whatever happens next, regardless of the specific timing. Watch the commercial shipping movements in the Strait of Hormuz. Watch whether the carrier strike groups currently positioned in the eastern Mediterranean begin repositioning eastward. Watch the activation status of American early warning aircraft operating from bases in the Gulf. Those movements will tell you more about what the people with actual intelligence access are expecting than anything you will hear from any podium in Washington or Tel Aviv. The clock is running. The window is closing. What happens in the coming days will echo for decades, and you need to be watching with clear eyes and a full understanding of what is actually at stake. I wish I could tell you something more reassuring. I genuinely do. I take no pleasure in sitting here and laying out for you a sequence of events in which every structural indicator points toward military action. Diplomatic channels are non-functional, and the people who are supposed to prevent this from happening are not in the rooms where that prevention would need to occur. But I am not here to reassure you. I am here because the people of this region and the people of this world deserve better than the sanitized, context-free, both sides framing that passes for geopolitical analysis on the major news networks. They deserve the truth about what these weapons do, what these doctrines require, and what the actual human cost of a regional war at this scale would look like in terms that go beyond abstract geopolitical positioning. Behind these tactical discussions are families in Tel Aviv who built bomb shelters 20 years ago and have been living in the psychological shadow of Iranian missile capability ever since. There are families in Tehran who have watched their country's economy strangled by sanctions specifically designed to prevent their government from building the military capability that is now making Israeli planners decide whether 72 hours is the right moment. There are families in southern Lebanon who survived 2006 and understand in their bones what the next war will feel like when it comes to their streets and their olive groves and their children. The moral catastrophe of not telling you the truth about how close we are to that moment is one I am not willing to accept, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth makes the conversation. The next 72 hours will tell us more about the future of this region than the previous 7 decades of conflict and negotiation. Stay informed, stay clear-eyed, and keep watching because the developments that follow from whatever decision is made in this window will require every analytical tool we have.